Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It's Monday, May 8th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean of the University of California, Berkeley Law School, author of Worse Than Nothing, The Dangerous Fallacy of Originalism. Also on the program today, the latest Texas mass shooter, this one who killed 8 at a mall, apparently a neo-Nazi. Meanwhile, 8 dead in Brownsville, Texas, as an SVU plows into them. Unclear whether this was an accident or intentional. Meanwhile, debt limit talks begin as Republicans are determined to push the country to the brink. Title 42 ends this week. Jury to hear closing arguments in Trump's civil rape case today. Biden's favorability ratings deeply underwater as his campaign ramps up. And also, coincidentally, as he names Neera Tanden to lead domestic policy. Oakland teachers are on day 3 of their strike. The Writers Guild, strike day number 7. The writer's strike is going to go on for a long time, folks. 8 Republican Georgia electors accept immunity deals in Fulton County. And Tucker Carlson apparently telling his allies he is going to go to war with Fox to get them not to pay him $20 million. All this and more on today's Majority Report.
Going to war within the confines of my NDA.
Exactly. To the extent that I can, my friends are going to leak things. Just been told on the IM that the Brownsville Police Department is about to hold a press conference on the SUV attack. That is, again, unclear with what's being reported at this point as to what the motivation. I've heard different witnesses say there were certain things. We just need more time on that. But obviously, in this day and age, the idea of someone using a car as a weapon to attack immigrants, not hard to imagine. Let's get right into this mass murder in Texas. It has even gotten Greg Abbott to get a little bit concerned that maybe there's some interest in some form of gun control in this country. I mean, you saw it in the, what's her name? Megyn Kelly tweeting out the other day, the battle's over. Why can't we for the Second Amendment, why can't we get together and figure out what to do about this? This is an attempt by those who are Second Amendment maximalists, who believe that because a right-wing Supreme Court found in 2008 that there is an individual right to have a gun, that guns should be everywhere, ranging from people who have YouTube shows where they wear a gun to so-called normalize it, to the ammosexuals who say you can't talk about banning AR-15s if you don't know the caliber size of all the various semi-automatic weapons that are out there. They've created a gun culture. Put up a graph. This is the number of gun deaths in Texas since 2014 as our gun laws have been weakened. 1,600 more gun deaths in Texas alone than there was in 2014.
Like 50% more.
It's unreal. That's in less than a 10-year period. That increase, that line going up.
It's nuts. Here is Greg Abbott on Fox News, and he must be aware of also these polling numbers on desires for background checks, enforcing gun laws, et cetera, et cetera. At one point, I don't think we're there yet because of the enormous amount of money in terms of the gun lobby and the intensity of pro-gun ammosexual voters. But Greg Abbott's starting to get a little bit nervous.
Is he going to pardon this guy as well?
Exactly.
Right?
Here we go.
As happens with these shootings, it almost immediately turns to the political conversation about gun reforms. One state senator pointing the finger.
Pause it for 1 second. Like, it's just, I've probably said this a million times. What else should we be talking about?
It's like saying, like, the question turns to, can we do anything about this?
Well, it's like, what else should we be talking about?
Now, we're soaking wet, and then the conversation naturally turns to, can we find an umbrella somewhere?
Right. I mean, there is literally, at this point, this happens multiple times a week. What else could you be talking about? Turns political. It should immediately turn to the question of, what are we going to do about this as a society?
This is a political show.
But even like in a non-politics, like, what else would you what other conversation could there be at this point? Should we have hospitals? Yes, I think we've resolved that. Should we allow the dead to just be on the body? Or should the question be like, is it valid to shoot video of this? Like, I mean, there's no other conversation to be had at this point. There's no value in saying, feel bad for the people. It's been done a million times.
Let's perform being solemn.
It's completely like there is no other. I don't even know what the possible other option could be. We're going to send sympathy to every mass shooting victim now that exists. People, that would be a full-time job for people.
Oh yeah. Well,
it would do nothing.
I mean, she's performing reluctance for a Republican governor on talking about like the exact issue that we should be talking about. I mean, that's what it is, right? Like, hey, I'm on your side, but I have to ask you this question.
Of course.
It's bullshit.
The amazing thing is that, like, that used to be a legitimate, like, point of argument. Now they're just almost exhausted as they say that because there's no other conversation literally to be had.
As happens with these shootings, it almost immediately turns to the political conversation about gun reforms. One state senator pointing the finger at you and the GOP there in Texas, saying there are loose and dangerous gun laws. I want to put up a poll that we just had on possible gun reforms here in the U.S. This is just out from Fox News. When you ask people what they would favor, background checks for guns, enforcing existing gun laws, legal age to 21, requiring mental health checks, flagging people for danger to self, all of those score at more than 80%. Are there things that you would consider in Texas or that you think Congress should consider at a federal level along those lines?
Well, on the federal level, as you know, some laws were passed last year to begin to address this. At the state level, listen, this is something that we've been grappling with over the past year. And there are some potential easy solutions, such as passing laws that we're working on right now to get guns out of the hands of dangerous criminals and to increase penalties for criminals who possess guns. But Shannon, we need to
pause it for a second. Was this, first off, This guy's been in office since 2014, and he's just now getting around to let's keep guns out of the hands of dangerous criminals.
Yeah, actually, there's easy things we can do. We just haven't done yet for some
Well,
reason.
I mean, it's just we've been working on that law. We'll have that out in about 2 weeks.
That's what the background check law is supposed to address. Exactly what she just put up on the screen.
But like, just think about the idea of like actually being able to go on to like, as governor, I've decided I'm going to go out on a limb and say dangerous criminals should not have guns. Really? Oh, okay. You would have thought that maybe you would have gotten to that a little bit earlier in your tenure. It's taken me 8 years to realize that dangerous criminals should not have guns.
Right.
And we're going to up the punishment on those dangerous criminals to have guns. Like,
and dangerous
and
criminal doing a lot of work there, right? Because it's basically what Republicans decide they'll want to enforce. They want right-wingers to be as armed as possible.
Isn't Abbott the same guy who said, like, when we were talking about like a total ban on abortion, he's like, and we're going to really now punish rapists.
Yes. Sure you are.
We're going to end rape in the state. Before, we didn't really think it was a priority.
We were letting it go.
But now we're going to. I mean, that's the exact same thing. It's just, it's amazing to me how this guy is able to say this like gobbledygook.
Bullshit.
And just total bullshit.
Get guns out of the hands of dangerous criminals and to increase penalties for criminals who possess guns. But Shannon, we need to recognize a reality. What we've seen across the United States over the past year or two, and that is an increased number of shootings in both red states and blue states. Shannon, we've seen an increased number of shootings in states with easy gun laws as well as states with very strict gun laws. I think that the state in which the largest number of victims have occurred this year is in California, where they have very tough gun laws where 11 people died. And so one thing that we can observe very easily, and that is there has been a dramatic increase in the amount of anger and violence that's taking place in America. And what Texas is doing in a big time way, we are working to address that anger and violence by going to its root cause, which is addressing the mental health problems behind it. We know that Texas had been lagging in addressing mental health for years, and that's why over the past 3 sessions, we've added almost $25 billion to address mental health. We're in the waning days of a session right now where we will be adding even more funding, about $3 billion, to address mental health needs in the state of Texas, especially in rural Texas.
All right, this is all just gobbledygook. There is... just Google red states and blue states gun violence. I mean, you'll come up with like 12 different articles in the next like 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks.
Thank you, Greg Abbott, for making the case that federal gun laws are necessary because state laws are insufficient.
It's not even remotely close, first off. It's without a doubt the number, I'm sure it's rising in both blue and red states. Just like, I don't know, it's the starting point. Red states have far more gun violence, and then just as the guns leak out to other places, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. Did you do that? Did you Google that? Yeah. I want to just put it up there. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind.
And this is also why we get incredibly frustrated about the mental health just throwaway line.
Yeah,
here.
just hit that hit that Forbes one. I mean, there.
There we go. But the right. There we go. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, the point is it's easy to find this. It's just absurd. It's just absurd.
How many ads does Forbes have on its website? But again, how much money? We're pouring a lot of money into mental health. What does that mean? What is it without socialized healthcare, without a public option? So you're giving, in many ways, probably just empowering law enforcement in some more way.
That's what I can't understand. We have all these mental health conversations in a country that still price discriminates for mental health care.
Yeah, exactly right. So what else should we be talking about? They're obsessed with talking about everything that
you know what Texas has not said yes to in terms of like their health care? no Medicaid expansion.
Right. That might help.
I mean, give me a break. It's just such lies. It really is amazing. I hope that guy doesn't go on to any actual TV program and just stays on Fox, because otherwise somebody should roast him. Honestly, it's just absurd. It's absurd that they can get away with something like that. All right, we're going to take a break in just a moment. We're going to be talking to Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean of the University of California, Berkeley Law School, author of Worse Than Nothing, The Dangerous Fallacy of Originalism. I really hope this is like we're in an era where we just put this to bed. Like it is done. It was always a lie. For too long, it was sort of considered a legitimate like judicial philosophy, and it's just a joke. They don't even follow it anymore. But first, a couple words from our sponsors. Mother's Day, right around the corner, right?
Yeah, next Sunday.
Still time. At the very least, you can get you can take a picture from the. That's what I've done in the past.
Take a picture of the receipt.
No,
or whatever.
you take a picture. You take a
order.
from the website.
Oh, right. Well,
you want to get your mom a great gift for Mother's Day? Cozy Earth. They have the softest, most luxurious, and responsibly sourced bedding and loungewear. Get some loungewear for your mom. I mean, the bedding you should get for yourself and for your mom, for that matter. But I'm saying loungewear seems to me to be more...
Honestly, a great gift, no matter who you're getting it for.
Cozy Earth has made Oprah's favorite things 5 years in a row. Their best-selling bamboo sheet set is made from 100% premium viscose from bamboo. It is completely temperature regulating. I don't know how that works. I don't know how you get bamboo that thin that it's actually as soft as it is. But I'm telling you, particularly now, it's getting warmer, and I happen to sleep hot.
Yes.
And Cozy Earth, it's temperature regulating. I don't know what else to say. Like it doesn't retain your heat in the same way. At least in the when it starts getting hot and in the winter, it keeps you warm. Cozy Earth offers a 100-night sleep trial. You sleep on it, you wash it, you try it out. If you're not completely in love, you send it back for a full refund. And also, they got a 10-year warranty. That is important. I have had sheets for much longer than 10 years back in the day. Much longer. Doesn't matter whether it's their luxury sheets, their loungewear, their pajamas, their plush bath towels. I just got some of those. Are amazing. Cozy Earth makes Mother's Day extra special. And Cozy Earth bedding now comes in 5 colors. And you get a beautiful reusable canvas bag. Honestly, I've got the loungewear, I've got the towels, I got some face towels, and the sheets, all of it. Couldn't be happier. Huge Mother's Day sale going on right now. Here's a dirty secret, too. You don't have to be giving it as a Mother's Day gift. Don't tell anybody I said that. Huge Mother's Day sale going on now. Save up to 35% at Cozy Earth. Hurry. Mother's Day offer ends soon. Go to cozyearth.com/majority. Enter the code majority at checkout. Save up to 35%. That's cozyearth.com/majority. Also, the way we do our hiring around here, it's ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter, it doesn't matter if you have a new business, if you have an existing business, if it's a small business, if it's a big business. If you want it to be successful, you got to get the best people working for you, and that's where ZipRecruiter comes in. And right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. And I've said this many times before. The best time to actually do this, to look for people, is when you don't need to hire. It gives you an opportunity to go out, see what's out there, get a sense of the process, so you're not doing it in a panic situation. Somebody gives you 2 weeks notice, and then you have no idea what you're doing. ZipRecruiter, you can go try it out for free right now, and just figure out. It also makes you think about like what jobs you have and what roles you want them to have. But why should you let ZipRecruiter? Well, one, they have powerful matching technology, finds the most qualified candidates for a wide range of your roles. And if you are looking at some of the resumes, you got people you think would be particularly qualified for your job, ZipRecruiter lets you send them a personal invite, makes them more apt to apply. People like to go places where they're wanted. And the ZipRecruiter also offers you to have like attention-grabbing labels that speak to job flexibility, like whether it's remote or not, or training provided, et cetera, et cetera. And the user interface is amazing. You can track throughout all the stages of your hiring process. Interview, callback, whatever it is. All of it. You've reviewed the application, et cetera, et cetera. You can rate it. Let ZipRecruiter fill all your roles with the right candidates. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Go see yourself. Check out ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter, it's the smartest way to hire. And lastly, very hard to maintain routines and habits. That's always been my experience. Mm-hmm. I've been getting better about it in my old age in terms of working out a little bit. Like I'll exercise like 3 or 4 times a week, maybe.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, my exercise is sort of minimal. But
okay.
Let's not get too carried away. But what I really tried to do is maintain good habits in terms of vitamins. And Ritual has made that much, much easier for me. They made a multivitamin for men that's based solely on science and designed to help you fill common nutrient gaps in your diet with 10 key nutrients. This is important. Like every time I go to the doctor's telling me, you should take this, you should take that. Yeah, you don't have enough vitamin D, et cetera, et cetera. I have been able to basically fix that. The last time I went to go see the doctor, he said your vitamin D level is the first time it's actually been good. And that is because I've been taking Ritual on a daily basis. It supports your heart health with omega-3 DHA. It has vitamin D3. It is vegan friendly. It is non-GMO. It is sugar free. It is gluten free. It is major allergen free. The capsule has a delayed release designed to make it gentle. If you're taking it on an empty stomach, there's nothing worse than having to wait until you eat because then you forget. The key is do it all the time. Well, not all the time, daily.
Right.
Has a minty essence in every bottle, keeps things fresh, makes your vitamin taking somewhat enjoyable. Again, do it on a daily basis. And here's the big thing for me, is because I always take vitamins until I run out of the first bottle, and then I'm done because I forget to do it, and then I forget about it, and then I say, oh, what's the point? I've dropped off and this and that. No, Ritual will send it to you on a regular basis and make sure that you always have your daily vitamins, and that's key. Essential for Men is quality multivitamin from a company you can actually trust. And get this, Ritual is offering listeners 10% off your first 3 months. Visit ritual.com/majority to start Ritual or add Essential for Men to your subscription today. Check it out. Ritual.com/majority. As always, we'll put our all these links in the podcast and YouTube description. We'll be back in just a second with Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean of the University of California, Berkeley Law School, author of Worse Than Nothing, The Dangerous Fallacy of Originalism. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Erwin Chemerinsky. He is the Dean of the University of California, Berkeley Law School, author, his most recent, Worse Than Nothing, The The Dangerous Fallacy of Originalism. Professor, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you.
I want to start, but I don't want to linger too long right now on the title, because I want to swing back to that after we go through the argument you're making here. But Worse Than Nothing is a response to the late Antonin Scalia, who was basically chiding anyone who was not a Federalist Society person that, like, there are limits to originalism, but you got nothing else essentially to argue against it. But your argument is it's worse than nothing.
Exactly. It does come in response to Justice Scalia. Justice Scalia responded saying, I have a theory and they don't. And my point in the book is that it's a theory that is not at all useful and is dangerous. So it's actually worse than nothing. We'll talk more generally about this, about where originalism is in terms of practice at this point in the institution, I guess, of the law, broadly speaking. But let's talk about the rise of originalism. I did not know this until I read your book, but it is amazing to me how many bad things Robert Bork created for this country. I mean, it really is stunning to me how much one guy could derail things like antitrust, but also really broadly our legal system. It's important to recognize that originalism developed, including by Bork, is a way of criticizing the liberal decisions of the Warren Court. Bork wrote his article in 1971, putting forth originalism. And we should be sure to define it. Originalism is the view that the meaning of a constitutional provision is fixed when it's adopted, they change only by amendment. So the First Amendment means the same thing today as was adopted in 1791. The 14th Amendment means the same thing as was adopted in 1868. Bork had written that there should be no right to privacy under the Constitution, no protection of right to purchase and use contraceptives, no right to abortion. He believed that there was no protection against sex discrimination, let alone sexual orientation discrimination in the Constitution, because the 14th Amendment was just meant to be about race discrimination. He thought that the First Amendment's protection of speech should only be about political speech. So no protection of speech that's for entertainment, and certainly no protection of sexually oriented speech.
Let's broaden out a little bit in terms of that originalism, so that we really, do it justice, at least in terms of what the idea is. It is a way of interpreting the Constitution that says that you need to go to original intent or original meaning or what? I mean, originalism is just such a sort of a vague term. I mean, we'll list the 5 problems that you do, but I want to try and steel man their philosophy.
As Robert Bork and Roald Berger developed in the early 70s, the focus was on what did the framers' intent of a constitutional provision mean? That was much criticized. After all, who were the framers? There were so many people involved in drafting and ratifying the Constitution. The myth to say there was an intent. So then originalists, including Justice Scalia, shifted and said, we'll look for the original public meaning. But we should note that originalists on the Supreme Court still shift between those two views. Last June, in a case called Kennedy versus Bremerton Schools, the Supreme Court said the meaning of the Establishment Clause, the provision there can be no law respecting the established religion, is determined by, quote, the views of the founding fathers. That's framers' intent. Other times the court says, let's just focus on original meaning. It's always unclear, though. How do you determine the original meaning, especially hundreds of years later in a very different world?
Do we even have a sense of what the original intent of the idea of a constitution was? I'm even backing up, never mind what the Constitution says, but how did the writers
I mean, that's the thing too. It's like we have the writers of the Constitution, we have the ratifiers of the Constitution, we have the people that they represent. But do we even have, or do they have, I guess those who subscribe to the original intent, do they have an idea about like what the purpose of the Constitution was?
I think so. I don't think there's dispute about the original goals of the Constitution. It was meant to set out a framework for government that could be much more effective than the Articles of Confederation. In fact, I think the preamble to the Constitution does a good job of setting out its goals. But where I think this becomes more difficult is with regard to judicial review, the power of courts to strike down laws or executive actions, the power of courts to interpret the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that describes a power of judicial review. There was no discussion of it at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. So when we're talking about originalism, we're talking about what was the theory of interpreting the Constitution that the framers had in mind for the courts, when the framers apparently didn't talk about what the role of the court should be at all.
Do we have any even like speculation as to what it could have been? I mean, based upon the way that judges functioned at that time, or I mean, it really is an amazing. It's either an amazing oversight, or it's an amazing recognition that this is something that's going to evolve and change depending upon what the sort of the, I guess, the expectations of the day are.
Let me start with the latter. In 1819, in McCulloch versus Maryland, Chief Justice John Marshall, who had been one of the framers in Philadelphia in 1787, said, and I'm quoting, "We must never forget that it's a constitution we're expounding. Constitution must be adapted and endure for ages to come." I think it is very difficult to know what the framers thought about judicial review because they didn't say. Maybe they assumed there would be judicial review. Some states like Pennsylvania had it. Maybe they assumed it wouldn't exist because it didn't exist and doesn't now in England. Or maybe they just didn't focus on it at all. But it's hard to take the modern practice of judicial review and see it as deriving from anything the framers had in mind when they wrote the Constitution.
But isn't that kind of the point, right? I mean, isn't the point that it's this kind of fanciful argument that only conservatives are engaging in because liberal justices aren't making determinations about what the founders intended? The only people playing that game is the right, and that's, you know, a way they can work backwards from their conclusions.
I think that's exactly what's happening. Is I think that the conservative justices are coming to conservative conclusions and then justifying it by finding the fragments in the historical record to support what they want to do. Think of the end of last June. The Supreme Court said that in certain circumstances, the government is required to subsidize religious schools if it gives money for secular private schools. The court said the only regulation of guns that will be allowed is that which was permitted in 1791 or maybe 1868. The court said there's no right to abortion in the Constitution. The court said that it violated the free speech rights and free exercise religion rights of a high school football coach to keep him going on the field and praying. Unless you believe that the framers' intent in 1787 and 1791 was the same as the current Republican platform, what you see is the conservative justices are coming to conservative conclusions and then dressing it up as originalism.
Let's talk about your 5 sort of problems with originalism. This is in terms of a methodology of approaching the Constitution. The first one is you call the epistemological problem. What is that?
We've already touched on it. So many people were involved in drafting, ratifying the Constitution. It's impossible to say there was an intent to be discovered. Even if we focus on original meaning, practices at the time varied. There's no reason to believe that what was done in 1787 or 1791 is what the framers meant to enshrine and protect for all time.
All right, so let's just be like, if we're looking at a law that is passed, right? I mean, I know the court does this. They're looking at they'll look at the Federal Register and they'll see what the debate was in the House and the Senate. And ostensibly, that's the way that you can glean the intent of
of Congress in passing a law. And your argument is we can't do that with the Constitution because they didn't keep the records in the same way, that it was too disparate. What is the, why can we do that for a law? And just let me just also preface this too. I can't help but think about Scalia in the Voting Rights Act case, the Shelby case, where he basically said this was their intent, but they were so afraid, that's why they passed they reauthorized the Voting Rights Act. So but please, sorry, original question.
There's so much in the question. First, the conservative justices have rejected looking at legislative history when it comes to statutory questions. They've said when it comes to interpreting statutes, we shouldn't be looking at the congressional history, statements in the House and Senate reports, because that's all too invented and too inconclusive. So the same criticism that Justice Scalia has made about looking at legislative history in the statutory context applies here as well. Second, it's all of the problems that you identified. There was no transcript of what went on in the Constitutional Convention in 1787. James Madison took the notes, but they are very incomplete. Also, there's limited records that went on in the state ratifying conventions. It's hard from this to say we know the original meaning. When I teach constitutional law, and I did this semester, I like to point to all of the places where Alexander Hamilton and James Madison disagreed about major questions. And if they, in hindsight, weren't in agreement, who are we going to say was the framer of the Constitution?
And to what extent do originalists move to become textualists, and how is it really in any way different? Because isn't a textualist really like an originalist who's interested in meaning as opposed to intent?
All justices start with the text of the Constitution. The problem is that the text rarely resolves any of the issues that come before the court. What's cruel and unusual punishment? The first case I ever argued in the Supreme Court about a man who was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison for stealing $153 with their videotapes. I argued it was cruel and unusual punishment. 5 justices rejected that. What's due process of law? What's liberty? What's free exercise of religion? How are these to be balanced against other interests? The text answers none of those questions.
Let's move on to the incoherence problem. What is the incoherence problem with originalism?
We touched on this too. If we want to be originalists, we should have to follow the framers' intent about how the Constitution should be interpreted. But the framers didn't want their intent to be controlling. There's a terrific article by Jeff Powell, a Duke law professor in the 1980s. I think it was titled The Original Understanding of Original Understanding. And he made a compelling case that the framers never imagined that their views would be controlling. Horst Bitker, a Yale law professor, also had an excellent article for this. So if we're originalists, then doesn't originalism compel us to abandon originalism?
Okay, tease that out for me. When you say they didn't intend for their opinions to be controlling, that means that the framers, if we are to sort of like concede that we could identify who the framers were, exclude some, include others, that they never meant for their ideas about what they were writing necessarily to be the end all be all, that they were completely rigid about it. So, how does originalism, so then the original, if we are actually subscribing to the originalists' intent, their intent is that you should not be originalists, essentially, is what the argument is. But how do we know that they didn't contemplate their words to be controlling?
We, of course, don't know what they intended with regard to how courts should interpret the Constitution, because the power of courts to interpret the Constitution is never mentioned and it wasn't discussed. Now, the reality is they looked at jurisprudence so differently than we do today. They believed that there was a natural law that was out there and that would be mechanically applied by judges. No longer do people believe that. So it's very difficult to take their philosophy of judging and apply it to the 21st century. But in terms of how do we know, I'll go back to the words of John Marshall, where he said, it's a constitution meant to be adapted and endure for ages to come. And John Marshall was one of the framers in Philadelphia in 1787.
The next problem you have is the abhorrence problem, which I think is a little bit more obvious to at least to my ears, and that is simply if you actually interpret the Constitution in the way that the originalists want, we would be living a horrible life.
Well, it would lead to constitutional jurisprudence that few, if any, of us would want. Under originalism, Brown versus Board of Education was wrongly decided. The same Congress that ratified the 14th Amendment voted to segregate the District of Columbia public schools. There's simply no evidence that Congress meant, in proposing and ratifying the 14th Amendment, to outlaw segregation. Under originalism, Loving versus Virginia was wrongly decided. Loving was the 1967 case that said that states cannot prohibit interracial marriage. Most states prohibited interracial marriage in 1868. California had a law that prohibited interracial marriage till 1948. As recently as 1967, when Loving was decided, 16 states still prohibited interracial marriage. Or take the Constitution's prohibition of sex discrimination or sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination. Justice Scalia was fond of saying there is no constitutional prohibition of sex discrimination because the framers of the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, were just focused on race. I would say any theory that makes Brown and Loving and a prohibition of sex discrimination illegitimate has to be one we reject.
In fact, Scalia referred to himself as a faint-hearted originalist. And to me, that gives away the game, right? Because the whole point of originalism is that this is a static document that we can divine the meaning of it because it exists completely separate from outcomes or context or anything. It was enshrined, and it's just a matter of like wiping the dust off of the tablets that it was imprinted upon. How can you be a faint-hearted one of those? That to me seems to be an incredible contradiction and an admission that we really can't do it this way, or we're going to have a horrible country.
I, of course, agree with everything that you just said. Let me try to put Justice Scalia's comment in context. Justice Thomas has said repeatedly that precedent should deserve no weight in constitutional law, and all prior decisions inconsistent with originalism should be overruled. And Justice Thomas has said this on many occasions. And countless decisions would have to be overruled by the Supreme Court if it was to be originalist. For example, no longer would the Bill of Rights apply to state and local governments. Justice Scalia, in response to that, said, I don't want to overrule all of those prior decisions. And it led him to say, I'm a faint-hearted originalist.
Well, I mean, so it occurred to me when Sam framed it that way that they're essentially grafting on a fundamentalist religious kind of perspective of the world onto the document as if it is some sort of biblical text, like where you're kind of working for outcomes to fit into it, but it also cannot be questioned at the same time, which seems to be as antithetical to what the founders intended as anything, given, what the First Amendment says.
I think your analogy to fundamentalism and religion is very apt. I think fundamentalists want to say, let's literally follow the text, whereas I think originalists want to say, let's follow the text in the original meaning, but only that. And of course, even for fundamentalists in religion, there's still interpretation required for the modern world. if somebody wants to be a very observant Jew, what does that tell us about turning on lights on the Sabbath or turning on the stove on the Sabbath? You're not going to find that in the text. You still have to interpret the text. Well, likewise, somebody still has to interpret the Constitution. And I think the same arguments for rejecting fundamentalism in the religious context apply to the way we should reject fundamentalism in the constitutional context. And of course, in the constitutional context, we live in a very different world today than that of the late 18th century.
Well, this is what you refer to as the modernity problem. Expand on that. I mean, a little bit more. I mean, obviously, like there's, a well-regulated militia comes to mind.
It does, of course. We live, as I just said, and as we all know, in such a different world in 1787 or 1791. It's difficult to see that their answers should be those for ours. You mentioned the Second Amendment. Well, should the Second Amendment be limited to just protecting the muskets that were there then? The Supreme Court says no. But we live in a world where there are AR-15s and mass shootings on a regular basis. We live in a world with much greater population density. Why does it make sense to just look to 1791? Or as an example of the modernity problem, there's a Supreme Court case 5 years ago that involved whether the police need a warrant before they obtain a large amount of cellular location information about a person. Our cell phones are constantly connecting to cell towers, so long as they're on, even not using them. The police, if they get that cellular location information, can, with a fair degree of precision, pinpoint where we were at any point in time. Should that require a warrant? Well, Justice Thomas in his dissent says no, because, of course, in 1791, that wouldn't have been a search. He says there's no invasion of physical property rights. Thankfully, the majority rejected that because it makes no sense for the meaning of the Fourth Amendment to be limited to what the framers knew in technology in 1791.
And then you refer to the hypocrisy problem. Which one is that?
This is the point that originalists abandon originalism when it doesn't get to the conclusion they want. In 2010, the conservative justices, including the self-avowed originalists, decided Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission and held that corporations have the right to spend unlimited amounts of money in election campaigns to candidates elected or defeated. It's impossible to say that the framers intended this. Corporations, as we know them today, didn't exist then, and campaign spending didn't exist then. Or in the next couple of months, the Supreme Court is likely to hold that college university can't engage in affirmative action. It seems clear to me from the historical record that the framers of the 14th Amendment meant to allow what we would call today as affirmative action. They approved many race-conscious programs, the sort that we describe as affirmative action. But I don't think that the conservatives are going to pay any attention to that history.
So it's basically like originalism when it works for our preferred outcomes and not when it doesn't. Your book outlines really a 50-year project to create this legal philosophy that is really more like it seems to me, I think, and your book makes it quite clear that this is really more of a branding exercise on how to dress up, getting to your preferred conclusions more often than not. And it also seems to me, in my experience, they have done a great job at this. That even, and maybe less so today, and I'm curious as to your opinion on that. But like 10, 15 years ago, there were people who disagreed with originalism who gave it at least some authority and took it as a good faith sort of like philosophy. Why were they able to do this when the other side, as Scalia said, it's better than nothing, wasn't able to develop a similar sort of competing philosophy?
I'll start by going back to where you began, Robert Bork. Because of his originalist philosophy, he got rejected by the Senate for a Supreme Court seat back in 1987. more senators voted against Bork than against any other nominee in American history because originalism was seen as unacceptable. The Federalist Society and conservatives have launched a 50-year campaign. I think some of the success of originalism is it seems so simple. Just follow the original meaning of the document. It's only when you think about it you realize how little sense that makes to take the original meaning of a document from 1787 and have it be controlling in 2023. In terms of the latter part of your question, I don't think there is a simple alternative theory. In fact, I don't think there's a theory at all that gives us determinate results in constitutional cases. The reality is the outcome of cases depends on who's on the court. If Hillary Clinton had won the election in 2016, and if she had picked the replacements for Justice Scalia, Kennedy, and Ginsburg, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There'd be one originalist justice on the court, Justice Thomas. He would write angry dissents. Conservative law professors would write articles defending originalism. But because Justices Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett would put on the court, joining conservatives, Roberts, Alito, and Thomas, it's a totally different court and one where originalism is now in ascendancy.
It's in ascendancy in practice, at least, but it seems like there's also a lot less sort of defense of it because they don't need to defend it anymore. Like, it's almost like the analogy I would say is that, the deficit spending, which was for the Republicans a huge sort of like a tent pole, has almost, or I should say a deficit reduction, has almost gone away because they just sort of, it was no longer helpful to them. It doesn't feel to me like there is as much of talk about originalism anymore because they realize like we don't that would only constrain us at this point.
I think that's right. You no longer hear conservatives talk about judicial restraint. That was the mantra of conservatives from Richard Nixon until recently, but they've given that up. I think your analogy to conservatives and the deficit is telling. When Donald Trump was president, they were cutting taxes. There was no talk about deficit. But now with the debt ceiling looming, conservatives are embracing the need for deficit reduction. So the arguments that people make are the ones that serve the agenda they want to achieve. And that's true of liberals and conservatives.
Is there really no, though, opportunity for liberals or left or center to the right to engage at least on the level of where the Federalist Society has? I mean, I seem to remember running into this sort of similar dynamic in education, where when the big sort of corporate so-called education reform movement was happening, they had the ability to create sort of like slogans that were very effective politically, value add, accountability, leave no child behind, all these things. But genuine educators, the nature of education, of good education, is that it must be specific to the student. And it was so contextualized that it was hard to come up with a sort of broad slogan that could be sold in the way that the reform movement had. This seems like to be a problem with the center left in terms of the legal institution, or is it just also impossible for them to concede, the legal institution, that really, to a large extent, judges are predetermining outcomes and reverse engineering things?
Who is on the court is going to determine the outcome in so many cases. That's certainly true in the Supreme Court. The reason that Justices Scalia and Ginsburg disagreed so often isn't that one was smarter or knew the Constitution better. They just started with different values. If Hillary Clinton had picked 3 justices, Roe versus Wade wouldn't have been overruled. And I think we have to acknowledge that. I think that liberals need to come up with a better way of defending their alternative and need to find a way of explaining to people that inherently constitutional law is about values and it's who's on the court that matters. So it means that elections really matter.
Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean of the University of California, Berkeley Law School. The book is Worse Than Nothing, The Dangerous Fallacy of Originalism. Thanks so much for coming on today. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm and in our YouTube and podcast description.
Thanks so much for having me on. Truly a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, folks. We're going to take a quick break. Head into the fun half. There it is. I mean, I think originalism is basically dead. They don't need it anymore. They don't need to justify it.
They'll rebrand it at some point, but it's like cancel culture is now, what is it? Wokeness?
Yeah, wokeness, political correctness.
Political correctness. Oh, yeah, right. No. Political correctness became cancel culture. Originalism will become something else.
But the only time where they came up with political incorrectness and wokeism and cancel culture was when they started to lose the power
to say the N-word.
To say the N-word, yes. But my point is that to lose the power of controlling who gets canceled and who doesn't, right? It's a lament that other people have some influence in the public sphere about who gets to cancel. It's the opposite dynamic, it feels to me. Like originalism was this sort of hue and cry of the right when they didn't have control of the court. But now that they do,
right,
all originalism is going to do is like, oh, we don't want anybody to have to compare our decisions to what we've said in the past about originalism, because then it's going to be clear that we were sort of full of it. So let's just not talk about that. They did the same thing with judicial activism and restraint for 10, 15 years. It's all you can hear about. Judicial activists,
yes.
On and on and on. You don't hear a single word about that now.
Right. That's why they have no qualms about overturning precedent and say Dobbs, because they've kind of put that part of their branding to the side.
Scalia was all about activism until the day that he got to say, well, the reason why the Senate reauthorized the Voting Rights Act is because they were afraid of being called racist. And everybody knows if the court determines that the Senate was afraid of being called racist, then we can invalidate the law they passed based upon our projected sense of whatever it is.
Right.
And I guess he called that the Al Sharpton excuse or something. I mean, this is what this guy was doing. He wasn't saying it specifically about that, but I mean.
Good riddance to him after all these years.
Oh, yeah. Very positive aspect that he's gone. But you know what? They kept making more of them.
It's wild. Like, I remember buying like 10 years ago, the Antonin Scalia collected opinions, thinking like, this was when I was still like listening to the National Review to see like, what are the smartest guys on the other side thinking? And you realize, oh, it's all just bullshit.
Total bullshit. It is amazing. We will get into some of that, I think, in the fun half.
Yes, and I would say that I think that the tides have changed where the intelligentsia legal establishment that might be like center left is much more skeptical of those claims than they were 10, 15 years ago.
About time.
I mean, I agree, but they treated originalism and judicial restraint with actual deference, which is insane.
I feel like Chemerinsky, really, he should have written that book 5 or 10 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, I wasn't going to say that, but we could have used that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good now. I put like a nail in the coffin, I think, because it's just not, it's a use it or lose it situation, and they don't need to use it anymore.
No.
Because everybody's just like, Thomas is up there going like, originalism would say that we would, draw and quarter, women, and
right.
And the rest of the court would be like, we don't need the originalism part. Let's just go with the decision. Folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. If you're a member already, you can always get our deals by checking out that day's podcast or YouTube description, or whether it's on the website or on however mechanism you use to consume the show. But if you are a freebie, you can get the free show free of commercials by becoming a member at jointhemajority.report.com. Also, your support makes the show survive and thrive. And you get to IM on the app. The app is completely free. Cosmopolitics. Just a little reminder to the Majority Report community, Sam is appearing on a little podcast tomorrow called movie night extravaganza to discuss 3 Days of the Condor, 8 p.m. East. I'll mention that again tomorrow, but that should be a lot of fun.
That'll be fun.
So check that out. Also, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY. You get 10% off. Tough night last night for the Celts.
Yes, we'll be talking about that. And yeah, Harden's up and down, but overall, like, greatest maybe playoff performance of his career so far.
No question.
We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about Jokic.
They really shut down Embiid.
Well, yeah, oh my God. He made some bucket towards the end, and you're just like, how is he that agile and that big at the same time? Yeah. But his presence is still so felt.
Horford played great defense on him.
Horford played amazing defense.
Yeah, he did that to Giannis last year, too. He's really good at defense.
We'll talk about that. The Florida Panthers is the Cinderella story of the NHL and more. I also want to talk a bit about the secret story behind tampering with the Eagles and the Cardinals, and we'll touch on the trans sports bans as that soon, because it's high time. Jeez, it's Monday that we talk about that. YouTube.com.
It's a high tide for those two. I mean,
high tide.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I love
knows?
mixing my metaphors.
On Left Reckoning this weekend, we had a Deep State Cuba from This Is Revolution on to talk. Well, we released one part for everybody, so for freebies, you can go over check out our conversation about Tucker Carlson's ouster. We had a Cuba on to talk about Tucker and manliness a while ago, so now we had to react to that. And for patrons, we got into Russia and Ukraine with Cuba. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get that.
Quick break. Oh, Al Conniption. Celtics are peaking so well at the perfect time they don't even need to take timeouts when the game is on the line because it's that good at choking.
That's also something I want to discuss.
That's an issue. I agree. That's an issue. But I think the reason why you had to make it about the timeouts was that, Smart hits that bucket. Horford missed a shot, too, that he would have felt like he would have otherwise hit a three-pointer earlier in that fourth quarter.
Right, but they should have taken the timeout
I agree with you.
To set up someone other maybe
But my point
Smart
is that, yes, it's quite clear they were peaking at the right time. They played a great game in that last fourth quarter. It didn't fall the way they wanted. Yeah. So my original point that El Conniption is still trying to give me grief about, but they've got to change. I wasn't saying that they're peaking about their timeout calling.
No. They're needling you.
Yeah, it's not working. Well, we'll see.
Sure.
Clearly not.
Yeah. Look, I hear you.
646-257-3920. See you in the front half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238-56-27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance.
Ooh.